Hello and welcome to the RotoWire WNBA show, where we talk about fantasy basketball. I'm Jason Shebilske alongside Kirien Sprecher. Today, we'll discuss some of the biggest news from this week, including the Aces signing Tiffany Hayes this morning. We'll also highlight some of the best players to pick up ahead of this weekend, and we'll preview some of this weekend's games from around the league and highlight what we'll be looking for. If you have specific questions as you're watching, feel free to leave them in the comments. And if you're watching live, we'll answer them on the show. If you're watching afterward, we'll answer them in the comments section. Those looking to test out RotoWire's full slate of tools can visit rotowire.com/try for a free trial. And don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you're watching. Kieran, we woke up to some surprising news that Tiffany Hayes is coming out of retirement to sign with the Aces. What are some of the fantasy implications of this move?
I'm afraid this means bad news for Chelsea Gray's timeline, right? She missed a couple of games during the finals last season due to a foot injury and was expected to be fine during the offseason. She signed an extension this offseason. However, she's been sidelined since preseason action due to what is being described as a lower leg injury. Not sure if the lower leg injury is related to the foot injury that she dealt with during the finals last year. But either way, Gray hasn't played yet this season. And the fact that the Aces are going out and adding more depth kind of signals that Gray probably isn't super close to return. There hasn't been a real substantial update on when Gray is expected back, other than ESPN's Michael Volpil saying in mid-May that Gray doesn't have a return timeline. Classic WNBA reporting. Also, a report saying that there is no report is not, in fact, a report. I'm sorry. Las Vegas is 4-1 to start the season, right? So Chelsea Gray's absence hasn't really been a detriment to their success because they are so deep and talented. But that also means that there's no reason to rush Gray back, right? Especially after signing a player of Hayes' caliber who's been around the league and been a solid player in the league for a long time. We don't know if Hayes is going to be available tonight, Friday. She just signed, so I would assume not. If Hayes is available, that could mean that rookie Kate Martin gets pushed out of the rotation. But until that happens, Kate Martin will probably still play around 20 minutes off the bench, while Lisa Clark and Kia Stokes can retain their starting roles.
Yeah, and like you said, one of my biggest hopes as the WNBA grows in popularity is that I hope that the the injury reporting just becomes a little bit more standard throughout the league, kind of like it is in the NBA. It's tough to report on things when there just isn't information being given, but yeah, hopefully Gray is back sooner rather than later. Her availability hadn't really been a concern in the past, so it's been surprising to see her miss so much time to begin this year. And really, part of the Aces' success over the past few years was that they had really been able to stay healthy outside of Candace Parker's injury last year. So it's been good to see them dealing with some actual on-court adversity to still go 4-1. But yeah, hopefully Gray is back soon, but the Hayes signing doesn't really give me too much optimism.
And like you said, the Aces have dealt with a little bit of on-court issues. They are 4-1, but they haven't been quite as dominant as we've come to expect them.
Right. I saw a tweet earlier this morning that was like the Aces had that one loss and said never again. So they signed Tiffany Hayes. So
Yeah.
always fun to see what comes out of Las Vegas. We've also had some prominent injuries pop up ahead of tonight's 4-game slate, including a thumb injury for Allisha Gray and a back injury for Courtney Vandersloot. Both are questionable for the games tonight, so it's not yet clear whether they'll be able to suit up. However, even if they play, it's possible that the injuries hinder their output if the issues linger. Uh, Both of these players have slightly underwhelmed early in the season, so the possibility of them being limited is especially concerning. Let's start with Gray. There hasn't been really much information about her thumb injury, but her absence would be particularly notable for Atlanta since Jordan Canada will remain sidelined due to a hand injury. If Gray's out, that should allow Haley Jones and Crystal Dangerfield to see more playing time. Jones has served exclusively as a starter to begin the season, with Canada being sidelined, but Jones hasn't scored more than 2 points in any of her last 4 appearances and hasn't really been on the fantasy radar in recent games. And Dangerfield has also had minimal contributions off the bench, but she was productive while serving mainly as a starter for Dallas last year. So there's a chance that she could carve out some sort of a role if Allisha Gray is forced to miss time.
Yeah, man. Haley Jones has been a real disappointment in fantasy so far this season. She showed flashes when she got extended playing time last year, and I thought that would Canada's injury would open up a huge opportunity for her to succeed. It just hasn't been there. As a Jordan Canada drafter, I picked up Haley Jones as like a handcuff option, hoping that Jones' production would, increase until Canada got back, and then I could just swap Canada back in. Hasn't been the case. Dangerfield hasn't been much better as a reserve for Atlanta. She's been held scoreless in 2 of the last 3 games. She played a season low 8 minutes last time out during a win over Washington on Wednesday. But yeah, like you said, if Gray and Canada are out, it's worth taking a shot on either or both of Jones and Dangerfield to take a step forward this weekend.
Yeah, and Jones especially has really surprised me early in her career. She was really productive in college, and I was excited to see what she would do at the WNBA level. But yeah, she just hasn't been able to really put things together so far, but hopefully it changes at some point, but not too much fantasy upside at this point. Vandersloot's production had also picked up recently, but she's still been inconsistent, as shown when she put up 6 points, 5 rebounds, and 2 assists in 26 minutes during Wednesday's win over the Mercury. She hasn't played over 30 minutes in any game this season, and that's pretty much unlikely to change if the Liberty want to be cautious with her back injury in the coming games. So if Vandersloot sees even more of a decrease, I'm getting pretty concerned about Courtney Vandersloot this season.
Yeah, Vandersloot was definitely a player I was fading during draft season, right? She's been a great real life contributor and a fantasy contributor throughout her career. But given her age and the talent around her this season, it was just hard for me to envision her taking on a leading role every night. And that's kind of what you needed where you were drafting her in like the middle rounds, the 3rd, 4th rounds. So yeah, Vandersloot's injury is just another reason why you should probably be looking to trade her if anybody has interest in her. But it's going to be difficult for her to deliver top tier production while being limited and being surrounded by other great players.
Yeah, Vandersloot is still the type of player who can put together those like strong performances. So if she has a string of maybe a few 30+ point fantasy games, like you can see if there's interest around her because it feels like there are more reliable options who you could probably trade for rather than risking the risk of Vandersloot on your roster.
Yeah, and if Vandersloot misses time, I think that probably just means more assists for Ionescu, more shot attempts for Stewart. Dojkic like maybe gets more PT. I kind of like the Liberty's bench this season more so than I have in past seasons. But it seems like there's no real consistency with any of their bench players. Like half of them get 10 minutes one night, the other half get 10 minutes the next night. So for fantasy purposes, that's a minefield and you don't really want to go into it. But if there was one waiver player that I would look for if Vandersloot misses extended time, it probably would be Dojkic. How about you?
Yeah, it's probably Dojkic for me, or even Naira Sabali or Kayla Thornton have shown some flashes. It's tough to pinpoint a single contributor, and this is part of the issue for fantasy managers when you're dealing with the Aces. But I mean, with the Liberty, because the Liberty are so solid on the court that they can afford to like give Vandersloot some rest when she needs it, give some of the other players some rest, and Sanya Brandello has been pretty adamant about like using more of the depth this year. So I don't know if there will be one player who gets like 25+ minutes a night, even if Vandersloot misses time. But I think Ivana Dojkic last year was one of my like favorite waiver pickups throughout most of the season. But I think that there are a few players who can really step up for the Liberty. Before we move on to our waiver targets for this week, if you enjoy videos like this, please consider subscribing to the channel. To kick off the waiver targets, I feel like I have to go with Tiffany Hayes, who should be available virtually everywhere. I'd be pretty surprised if she played Friday against the Dream, even though it would be a fun storyline with her playing in Atlanta against her former team. Um, However, she's averaged double-digit points with at least three rebounds per game in each of her last 10 seasons. It wouldn't be surprising to see her role decrease slightly now that she'll be playing for the back-to-back champions. But this move to me suggests that the Aces are preparing to be with Chelsea Gray a bit longer, as we said earlier in the show. Hayes hasn't really been the most consistent option throughout her career, but especially in 10 team leagues, she has more upside than a lot of the players who are likely on the ends of fantasy benches. Kate Martin's production had been increasing recently, but it feels like Hayes will take some or most of that workload now. Martin is still a decent streaming candidate in my eyes in the short term, but her long term role became murkier with Hayes signing.
Yeah, I totally agree on all of your points with surrounding the Hayes signing. I talked about it a little bit before. So I'll just hop right into my first waiver target. It's kind of an interesting one because she's currently has an injury designation and we don't know if she will play tonight. So this is maybe more for those teams that have maybe have this week locked up, right? But we don't really know. Like you and you're looking forward to like establishing a deeper bench going forward, right? So my top waiver pickup is Jaelyn Brown. She's missed 4 straight games, but last Saturday she was listed as out due to an illness and not the nasal fracture, which sidelined her for the first 3 games. We have no word on her availability, like I said, but she should be back soon, and she should be able to make an impression with Natasha Howard and Satu Sabali still out for multiple weeks. Brown started the opener. We've talked about her on the show. I think she'll get a chance once she's available, and the fact that she's not being listed with the nasal fracture anymore signals to me that she should be good to go moving forward. And I think that she could be a solid depth piece for fantasy managers moving forward. And I also think that she was probably dropped in a lot of leagues after the injury because she was kind of a fringy player. So after she suffered the nose injury and she had surgery, I feel like she probably got dropped in a lot of leagues. So Jaelyn Brown's definitely an option for managers who have a strong starting lineup and are just looking for another depth bench piece for the next couple weeks.
Yeah, similar to a lot of the injuries that we've talked about both today and the season. Not a lot of information out there, but yeah, I agree that it's encouraging to see that the injury designation has now shifted to an illness rather than a nose injury. So hopefully she's back in action soon. Sophie Cunningham of the Mercury is also worth highlighting as a player to add. She's taken on a starting role over the past 2 games since Rebecca Allen is dealing with a concussion. It seems likely that Cunningham will move back to the bench once Allen is clear to return, but Cunningham has been a reliable contributor off the bench early in the season. She scored at least 21 points on ESPN fantasy leagues in each of her last 4 bench appearances, which really signals her high floor, even with the new look Mercury. She just became rostered in over 50% of ESPN leagues this week, so there are still a lot of leagues where she should be added. I'd definitely add her if she's available in a 10-team league that I'm in, and also in an 8-team league. 6-team leagues are where it becomes a little bit more of a decision for me. But if you have a mid to low tier player who hasn't performed very well recently or has just been inconsistent, Cunningham could help to pick up the slack, at least as a streaming candidate. But even if you want to have her as more of a season long option, I'm not shying away from it in a 6-team league.
Yeah, I think Cunningham can be a season-long option. Even before she moved into the starting lineup, the first 5 games of the season, she averaged nearly 26 minutes per game, 10 points, 5 boards, 2 steals. I do think Cunningham is one of those classic, like 3-and-D sporadic performers in fantasy, right? Like when the 3-point shot is falling, you're like, oh, she's fantastic. She's worth a third-round pick. And then when the 3-point shot isn't falling, she isn't necessarily getting those steals. You're like, she scored 3 points for me today. She's just one of those players that you kind of just have to roll the dice with. But those dice are a little bit loaded with Rebecca Allen out, right? Like with Allen out, she's getting 30 plus minutes as opposed to 26. So, a couple extra minutes, a couple extra shots here and there. Cunningham, definitely an option, a strong option for this weekend. And I think probably a decent option for the rest of the season too. So moving on to my next pick, it'll be Aerial Powers. She has been operating off the bench, but has scored at least 15 ESPN fantasy points in 3 straight games. She's seen increased playing time in each of those contests, culminating in a season high 23 minutes Wednesday against Atlanta. We talked about Allisha Gray's injury, talked about Jordan Canada's injury. Powers is playing well, and it's coming at a time where her team is depleted. So I think she has a clear path to playing time. She's a solid all-around performer. I don't think she has a super high upside in fantasy, but Powers is definitely a player that I'm looking to for if I need like an extra player this weekend. If my opponent has a couple extra players playing this weekend ahead of me and I'm trying to match them, definitely looking at picking up and streaming Powers this weekend.
Yeah, Powers is one of those players that we'll talk about from time to time on the show and just in our writing, where she's been really productive in the past, but just has kind of seen her role fall off recently. She was one of my biggest disappointments of last season. She just kind of saw an abrupt decline in playing time. She averaged 26.9 minutes per game in 2022 and had 14.4 points, 4.7 rebounds. But then last year, she played in just 20 games, all off the bench, and averaged 5.2 points and 1.8 rebounds in 9.8 minutes per game. So when she signed with Atlanta, I was really looking at it as a bounce back opportunity, but she underwhelmed in her first two appearances of the season. But I think she's getting more on my radar lately. And if she can exhibit even like a slight fraction of what she displayed in 2022 with the Lynx, I think that the fantasy value is definitely there for her.
Yeah, look, she averaged at least 10 points per game in 6 of her first 8 WNBA seasons, right? Like she is a productive player. But she also has dealt with a lot of injuries throughout her career. She hasn't, and over the last 2 seasons, the playing time just hasn't been there. So I don't think she has as high of an upside. Like I don't think she'll ever get back to that 2022 production for an entire season. But I do think you can get a week or 2 weeks out of her where she's averaging nearly 10 points per game, 5 boards, a couple of stocks. So I think you just got to pick and choose your moments when you're going to play Powers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that we talk about really in all fantasy sports is talent versus opportunity. And Ariel Powers is one of those players who definitely has the talent. And now it seems like she's getting the opportunity. So that's a good sign for her. Aari McDonald of the Sparks is also a solid streaming option while Layshia Clarendon is sidelined. McDonald was held to single digit ESPN fantasy points in her first 4 appearances of the season, but she's logged at least 16 now in each of her last 3 outings. A direct correlation, or at least a pretty direct correlation, can be made between McDonald's surge and Clarendon's absence. So it wouldn't really be surprising to see McDonald's role go back down once Clarendon is back. However, there can also be times when a player impresses during a fill in opportunity and sees more of a role down the stretch. Like we talked about Tuesday, the fear of the unknown isn't really a good reason to avoid picking up a player. So if you have someone who's underperforming on your team, I'd absolutely have McDonald on your radar.
Agreed. And the other things that we got to talk about in Los Angeles, Clarendon's absence is obviously huge. But you look at Kia Nurse had a couple she started the season off insane, and then she had a couple really bad performances. She's rebounded in the last 2 appearances. But Lexi Brown has also scored in single digits in 3 of the last 4. So I think, as the season progresses, I think things will change in Los Angeles. And, if Brown and Nurse get into those lulls, McDonald can still be a productive player even when Clarendon comes back. But like, again, it's one of those players where you just kind of have to like pick and choose your moments. And I think this is a good time to roll McDonald out with Clarendon hurt.
Yeah, and we went through our WNBA like fantasy power rankings on Tuesday, and we didn't get through the whole league, but it feels like if we had, Los Angeles would have to be kind of toward the bottom of the league for me, not because of their lack of talent. They have so many players who on their roster who it feels like they should be really solid contributors, but it's so hard to predict on a night to night basis who will perform really outside of De'Erica Hamby this season. So they've been a little bit frustrating across the board for fantasy purposes, but hopefully at least one of their other options can carve out more of a role soon.
Totally. And okay, so going back to the free agent pickups and going back to like my Jaelyn Brown pickup, I got 2 more for you that are kind of for teams that are in a good position this week and are looking to make their team better in future weeks. And so I'm going with 2 more injured players, Clarendon and Rebecca Allen. We've mentioned both of them. They're out with concussions. But concussions aren't, week long or multi-week injuries, right? Like these players should be back soon, and they'll be back to contributing, and they're probably were dropped because of their current injuries. So, if this weekend you're looking at your lineup and you're up 100 points and you have more players playing than your opponent, and you're like, how can I make my team better for, the weeks 4, 5, week 6? I think these two players are really solid depth pieces that could be depth pieces on your fantasy lineup that are starters when healthy and play consistent roles, right? I think Rebecca Allen, like we talked about with Sophie Cunningham, like Allen, I was kind of surprised that Allen got the starts over Cunningham, but Allen has been great. Clarendon dropped a triple-double in the first game of the season for the Sparks. So, the fact that you're not going to be finding a player capable of dropping a triple-double off the waivers moving forward, right? So if those players were dropped, you should take advantage if you can. I'm not saying like you should pick these two players up if you're in a tie game and you and your opponent each have the same amount of players playing this weekend. That's probably not the best move here. It's kind of like a workaround, and you're planning for the future. Obviously you want to win every week, but you want your team to be the best come the postseason.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you have to approach it on a fantasy team by fantasy team basis, even at this point in the season, because the WNBA fantasy season, I think, is only like 8 to 10 weeks. So you have to make every week count. But like you said, maybe there is a league where you're up by a bunch. There's basically no chance that anyone catches you this week. And if you can afford to load up for the future, that could be a good opportunity. Kind of putting you on the spot here. If you have one roster spot available and Layshia Clarendon and Rebecca Allen are both available in your league, do you have a preference between the two?
I'm probably going Allen, just because, I said Clarendon dropped the triple-double in the week 1, but the production wasn't really there. I think both players are sporadic performers, but I think, Allen has a little more consistency to her role than Clarendon does, where I think we talked about all the guards in Los Angeles that are sporadic, and Clarendon's one of them. I think in Phoenix, Rebecca Allen's just like the shooter, and she's surrounded by Natasha Cloud, Kalea Copper. Like, she's surrounded by these players that will get her open looks.
Yeah, I agree. It feels like Rebecca Allen has a little bit higher floor and will just be a little bit steadier option down the stretch. So looking ahead to this weekend's action around the WNBA, one thing I'll be watching for is to see if NaLyssa Smith can maintain her momentum in a back-to-back set. She returned to the starting lineup Thursday against Seattle following the news that Temi Fagbenle would be out for several weeks. Smith finished with her second double-double of the season, posting 23 points, 10 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal in 33 minutes. She'll be facing 2 tough front courts this weekend against the Sky and the Liberty. So this will be a formidable test, but Smith has displayed the talent in the past and has been a solid producer. So hopefully she'll be able to use this opportunity to really step up for Indiana this season.
One of my biggest points about why I thought Caitlin Clark was going to be super successful right away in the WNBA was because she was surrounded by players like NaLyssa Smith and Kelsey Mitchell and Aaliyah Boston. And, she just hasn't really gotten that help from those types of players so far. I know Smith has put up some good numbers, but it seems like Smith puts up good numbers or Boston puts up good numbers. And it's never both of them at the same time. I just feel like Indiana is really kind of like searching for like a fluidity throughout their lineup because, Clark has some moments, but then she's also inefficient at times and she needs help. Bench when NaLyssa Smith went to the bench for that one game, she was like a -20 off the bench, and I was really concerned. I was like, that seems like a veteran player who's like these young bucks are coming in, and I'm just gonna check out now. I got benched. I've never been benched before in my career. -20, and it was like a 5-point game. Like that's a significant difference. So I was really concerned when I saw that. It was nice to see her bounce back a little bit in the starting lineup, but then that was kind of at the detriment of Aaliyah Boston. So Indiana's just in a really weird spot right now. I'm still going to be tuning into all their games because it's interesting, but it's like and I love Caitlin Clark and I want her to be successful, but watching them, it's like, watching like your little brother play like JV baseball and you're just like, ooh, that was bad. No, but you can't like overreact too much because, you love your brother and you don't want to see him fail. So, and I don't think the Fever are like too far off. I just think that, they're still trying to find their way and they've played so many games so fast. So they don't really have much practice time to like fix these injuries. But I do think Nalissa Smith is like one of the keys to turning around the season. I don't think they're going to turn around into a postseason team or anything, but turn this around, get some wins in the middle of the season, and just kind of like put your best step forward. I shouldn't be talking about next season already, but like you got to put something on paper this season to get yourself excited about the future that is in Indiana. And I think that like the future that everyone was predicting before the season can still like happen. But we just haven't really seen as many flashes that we would have liked.
Yeah, and it's really so tough looking at their schedule because you look at their upcoming matchups, it feels like every week, and it's like, ooh, that's a tough matchup. That's a tough matchup. Even the Sky, like out of all of their early season opponents, the Sky probably should be a little bit of their like quote unquote easier opponents, but Chicago's been performing really well recently, and they've been a little bit more inconsistent than like some of Indiana's other opponents this season, but it still feels like this is a winnable game for Chicago, and Indiana will just have their hands full with Elizabeth Williams, Angel Reese, and Isabel Harrison if she's like fully available. So it could be an interesting weekend for the Fever for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting week every week for the Fever until they start stacking up some wins. And we've talked about it before. There's just really no easy games in the WNBA. I know the Mystics are, haven't won a game yet, but it's like you still like you look at the Mystics and Shakira. If Shakira Austin's playing 30 minutes a game, things are probably different to start the season in Washington.
Yeah.
Anyways,
and even with the Mystics, like they've played most of their opponents really close. So it hasn't been like they've been blown out on a night to night basis. So really any opponent, like every opponent should be taken seriously in the WNBA and no one should be overlooked.
Respect all, fear none, as my JV baseball coach used to say. So the thing that I'm looking forward to, you kind of talked about the bottom of the standings a little bit, so I'll just go right to the top. Are the Connecticut Sun going to stay undefeated, right? They got matchups against Dallas and Atlanta on Friday and Sunday, respectively. We just said that there's no easy matchups in the W, and that's true. But when you look at a team of Connecticut's caliber and the way they've been playing, these are two pretty easy win, or not easy, but like winnable games. They're going to be favorited. They're going to be heavy favorites in both of those games. So can the Sun just keep on chugging along and take out the two teams that they should beat? Obviously Alyssa Thomas has been fantastic. Dewana Bonner has been fantastic. Brianna Jones has slightly worked her way off of that minutes restriction. She's still been limited a little bit. But then you're just getting like solid contributions from players we didn't really expect. And Dejanay Carrington, Tasha Harris, Tiffany Mitchell has been playing a little bit. Mariah Jefferson's healthy. She's starting to see some more minutes. This Connecticut team is the real deal, man. I think that they'll stay undefeated. And I don't really see them losing until another matchup against the Aces or maybe possibly the Liberty. Also Minnesota could challenge them, but like the way that Connecticut has played, and it's not even just this year, man. It goes back, back multiple years. They're so consistent and so sound. We talk about the Aces and we talk about the Liberty and even Seattle this year now with the super teams, right? But like, and I don't really want to call Connecticut a super team. Like, no disrespect to Alyssa Thomas or Dewana Bonner, right? Like, they're superstars for sure. But like, that kind of takes away from what they've built as an organization, really, the last 4 or 5 years. They're so steady, so consistent, and they continually fight those super teams and play hard against them. So maybe this is the year where, they can take out the Aces of the Liberty in the postseason.
Yeah, and Connecticut's schedule after Dallas and Atlanta this weekend, they have Washington on Tuesday, which feels like another winnable game. They play New York next Saturday, but they'll have had a lot of rest before that game. So it feels like they could potentially run the table until mid to late June, which is a scary thought. But really, the Sun have been kind of hiding in plain sight for a while, and it's good to see them finally putting things together like they have.
I like that. That sounded it figuratively and literally. The sun does hide in plain sight.
Yeah.
That was great. That was great.
Thank you.
And like you said, they got a long break before that game against the Liberty, right? So that you could be looking at 10-0. And I'm not trying to throw any red flags or raise any alarms about the Liberty or the Aces yet, but they really have they're winning games, but they really haven't hit their stride, like we've mentioned, where Connecticut's playing the best. And not to make too many analogies to other sports, but in the NFL, everyone's like, well, I don't want to be considered the best team in November, right? That's not, you don't want to be the best team in November. You want to be the best team in February, right? And so while everything is going well for the Sun right now, it's all about finding a way to continue that throughout the season.
Yeah, and it is especially scary for the rest of the league because, like you mentioned, Brianna Jones has been on that minutes limit, and she's been increasing her workload ever so slightly. But with Jones limited and the Sun doing what they have been, it's scary to think about what they'll do when she's fully available. So that does it for our Friday show. Be sure to join us next Monday. We'll be back to our Monday time slot at 1 p.m. Central. We'll talk about some more players to target from around the league. And looking ahead, be sure to join us next Friday as well. We'll have a very special guest in ESPN's Liz Loza joining us on the show. So be sure to join us again then at 1 p.m. Central. We'll see you later on. Thanks for watching.